She walked into the luxury dealership wearing jeans and a plain white t-shirt, just a woman with a quiet smile and a question about a car. But within minutes, she was laughed at, dismissed, and told she didn't belong. The staff never even asked her name, and that was their first mistake. What they didn't know, that woman wasn't just any customer, she was someone whose influence, compassion, and quiet strength would turn their world upside down. This isn't a story about revenge. It's a story about dignity, humility, and one powerful act of grace that would transform not just a business, but the people inside it. And the best part? It all happened without a raised voice, just one woman who knew her worth. Stick around, because what unfolds next may just change the way you see people forever. Part 1. Not the right kind of customer. The dealership gleamed like a shrine to wealth. Westport Luxury Motors stood on the edge of downtown Boston, glass walls, polished chrome accents, and a valet circle that seemed built for royalty. Inside, rows of high-end vehicles rested under spotlights, Ferraris, Bentleys, McLarens. It was a place where elegance whispered and judgment shouted. Emily Carter stepped through the main doors in faded jeans, a simple white t-shirt, and scuffed sneakers. Her brown hair was tied back into a loose ponytail, and she carried no handbag, no jewelry, no signs of wealth, just calm eyes, a quiet demeanor, and a question on her mind. She approached the front desk, her gaze drifting toward a midnight blue coupe displayed on a raised platform. The sleek lines of the car caught her breath, the perfect gift for her sister, who had just beaten breast cancer. It wasn't just a car, it was a statement of love, survival, and joy. A sharply dressed salesman spotted her from across the floor and frowned. Brian Matthews, the dealership's sales manager, straightened his tie as he sauntered toward her. His smile was more smirk than sincerity. "Can I help you?" he asked, giving her outfit a quick once-over. "Yes," Emily replied, polite but direct. "I'm interested in that blue coupe. What model is it?" Brian's smile thinned. He glanced at the $285 Azure Edition coupe behind him, then back at her. "That vehicle starts at just under $300,000, he said, his voice heavy with suggestion. "I see," Emily replied calmly. "Is it available to view?" He let out a soft chuckle, then gestured casually toward the exit. "Honestly, I think you might be in the wrong place," he said. "We do have a used inventory building about 3 blocks east. A bit more practical." Across the showroom, another salesman snickered under his breath. 2 customers turned to watch. Emily could feel the flush creeping up her neck, not from shame, but from the sting of public humiliation. Still, she didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't explain that she wasn't just browsing, that she had every intention, and more than enough means, to buy that car today. She simply nodded, turned on her heel, and walked out, her sneakers squeaking slightly against the polished tile. Outside, in the bright morning light, Emily blinked against the sting in her eyes. She'd been judged before, dismissed by people who equated wealth with wardrobe, but it never stopped hurting. Not for herself, but for everyone who'd been made to feel small just for looking different. As she reached into her pocket for her phone, a slow, resolute smile began to form. They didn't know who she was, but by tomorrow, they would. Part 2. The Quiet Plan. The ride home was silent. Emily Carter sat in the passenger seat of her Tesla, hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on the horizon. The city whirred past, honking horns, blinking lights, coffee carts, but inside the car, the humiliation still echoed louder. When she pulled into the long, tree-lined driveway of her home just outside Boston, the world changed. The modest front of the house gave no clue to what it held behind: 5 acres of private estate, a full guest wing, and the kind of architectural balance only a former architect like her husband could create. Stephen Carter, tech pioneer, renewable energy visionary, and the man who still left her love notes by the coffee machine, looked up from his laptop as Emily entered the study. He could tell instantly something was wrong. "Talk to me," he said gently, rising from his chair. Emily gave a tired smile and sank into the leather armchair across from him. "I went to Westport Motors today." Stephen raised an eyebrow. "The dealership with the fancy blue coupe you mentioned?" She nodded. "I wanted to surprise Caroline for her birthday. After everything she's been through, she deserves it. But the moment I walked in, the sales manager, Brian, I think, looked me up and down and decided I didn't belong. Told me I was in the wrong place. Said maybe I'd have better luck at their used lot, 3 blocks east. Stephen's jaw tightened, but he let her finish. Emily laughed softly, but it wasn't from amusement. It wasn't even the rejection that got to me. It was how comfortable he was with humiliating me. Right there, in front of staff and customers. Like I wasn't even worth speaking to like a person. Stephen was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "We've built a life where you don't need to explain yourself to anyone. But this is something else." Emily met his eyes. Exactly. I'm not angry for me. I've faced that kind of prejudice before. I walked away. And I'll be fine. But what about the people who can't just walk away? What about someone trying to buy their first car for their kid? Or someone saving for years, only to be laughed out of a showroom because of how they dress? Stephen nodded, already understanding. I don't want revenge, Emily added. I want them to learn. I want them to feel the weight of their assumptions. I want someone like Brian to remember the next time he looks someone up and down, that they just might own the building he's standing in. A slow grin crept across Stephen's face. Well, I can't buy the dealership. Please don't buy the dealership, Emily said, laughing now, some of the tension releasing. But, he said, leaning forward, eyes sparkling, what if we show up tomorrow and deliver a message he'll never forget? Not by yelling, not by demanding anything, just by showing him exactly who he dismissed. Emily tilted her head. Subtle? Very. Stephen smirked. Elegant. Even. She nodded slowly, the gears turning in her mind. And the car? We'll buy it, he said, but not through him. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills and the lights of Boston twinkled in the distance, Emily sat by the fireplace with a cup of chamomile tea. The flames flickered across her face as she reflected on the day. What hurt wasn't just the insult, it was the reminder that too many people still believe wealth comes dressed in suits and heels. That a simple t-shirt means that someone's worth can be measured in leather shoes and watch brands. But tomorrow, they'd learn, not through shouting or social media call-outs, through grace, poise, and a lesson in quiet power. She glanced at her phone and sent a quick message to her assistant. Have Daniel at Westport contact me if he's available tomorrow. Not Brian, Daniel. Then she leaned back, watching the flames dance. The coupe wasn't just a gift anymore. It was about restoring dignity for herself, for her sister, and for everyone who had ever been made to feel like they didn't belong. Part 3. The Rolls-Royce moment. It was just after 10:15 a.m. when the quiet hum of a powerful engine brought conversation to a halt inside Westport Luxury Motors. The showroom, normally buzzing with carefully choreographed sales chatter, fell into stunned silence as a Rolls-Royce Phantom, custom painted in shimmering midnight blue, glided to a stop directly outside the front doors. The sun caught its polished finish, casting soft flares of light across the dealership floor. Inside, Brian Matthews, sales manager and self-appointed gatekeeper of serious clients, froze mid-sentence. Even for a man who saw six-figure vehicles daily, this Phantom was in a class of its own, ultra-rare, ultra-expensive, and unmistakably exclusive. Staff gathered near the windows. Customers paused mid-tour, eyes widened. The chauffeur, dressed in a crisp black suit and white gloves, stepped out, walked around, and opened the rear passenger door with practiced elegance. From the car emerged a tall man in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, refined, deliberate, every inch the image of old-world wealth with modern polish. His silver-flecked hair was combed neatly, his posture straight, his expression unreadable. He stepped onto the showroom floor as if he owned it. Brian adjusted his tie and smoothed his jacket, putting on his most charming smile. Good morning, sir. Welcome to Westport Luxury Motors. I'm Brian Matthews, sales manager here. It's an honor to have you. The man offered a firm handshake. Stephen Carter. Brian blinked. The name was vaguely familiar. But it didn't matter. The car, the suit, the presence. This man was a whale. Possibly corporate fleet level. How can I help you today? Mr. Carter? Perhaps you'd like to view our newest models. Stephen raised a hand, stopping him gently but firmly. Actually, I'm here about a very specific vehicle. The Azure Coupe, midnight blue. Brian's smile grew. Excellent taste, sir. It's one of only 15 produced this year. We have one on display right over. I know, Stephen cut in. My wife came to see it yesterday. Brian hesitated. Your wife? Yes, Emily Carter. She wore jeans and a white t-shirt. She came in with every intention of purchasing that vehicle for her sister's birthday. The smile faltered. Brian's face began to pale. Stephen continued, his voice calm but cutting. She left feeling humiliated, insulted, and dismissed, because someone here decided that how she dressed determined her worth. A ripple moved through the showroom. Staff who had stood in silence began shifting awkwardly. One of the junior salesmen, Daniel, stepped forward, looking uncomfortable. Brian cleared his throat. Mr. Carter, I assure you, if there was a misunderstanding. There was no misunderstanding. Stephen interrupted. There was a choice. A choice to treat my wife as less than. A choice to judge without asking. To assume without listening. At that moment, Emily walked through the showroom doors. Still in jeans. Still in her plain white t-shirt. Still graceful. This time, no one smirked. Her presence was magnetic, not because she tried to stand out, but because she had nothing to prove. Stephen turned to her. Emily, I was just explaining how your visit yesterday went. Emily smiled softly and turned to Brian. You remember me? Brian opened his mouth, but no words came. Emily looked around the room. I came here to buy a car. I'm still here to do that. But I'd like Daniel to help me. The young salesman blinked. Me? Stephen nodded. You treated my wife with respect. That matters. Brian's voice cracked. Mr. Carter. Stephen turned back, his voice even. No hard feelings. Mr. Matthews. Just a reminder. Next time. Listen before you look. As Brian stood frozen, Daniel led Emily toward the Azure Coupe. Staff and customers watched in stunned silence. Then Stephen added, loud enough for the room to hear. By the way, the Azure isn't the only purchase we're making. We're also replacing part of our corporate fleet. And I'd like all those transactions handled by people who don't assume net worth is worn on someone's sleeve. He walked over to Emily, placed a hand gently on her back, and smiled. Let's take a look inside. Brian, once so sure of his place atop the hierarchy, could only watch as everything shifted beneath him, not through force, but through quiet power and character. The sale, the moment, the lesson, it was his to lose. And he had. Part 4. A different kind of correction. The deal was closed within 30 minutes. Emily Carter signed the purchase agreement for the Azure Coupe, her calm composure unwavering as Daniel, the young and nervous salesman, guided her through the paperwork. His hands shook slightly, but he was earnest, respectful, and meticulous, qualities that had earned him more than just a sale that day. Meanwhile, Brian Matthews stood awkwardly near the manager's desk, his face drained of color, his usual swagger long gone. He had just lost the largest commission of the quarter. And worse, in front of every member of his staff, he'd been forced to face the consequences of his assumptions. But the worst part? It wasn't over. As Emily and Stephen prepared to leave, Richard Lane, the dealership's regional director, arrived, summoned by a concerned assistant who had been watching the entire situation unfold via internal cameras. Richard, a man in his early 60s with a silver beard and quiet gravitas, shook hands with Stephen and Emily in the center of the showroom. I want to personally apologize, he said, his voice low but clear. This is not how we do business, at least, not how we're supposed to. Stephen offered a polite nod. Then maybe it's time to take a closer look at the culture you're allowing. Richard didn't flinch. You're absolutely right. Brian, sensing an opportunity for damage control, stepped forward. I had no idea she was your wife. Sir, if I had known. Emily raised a hand, stopping him. That's exactly the problem, Mr. Matthews. You shouldn't have to know who someone is to treat them with basic courtesy. Brian's mouth opened but no sound came out. Stephen turned to Richard. We're not interested in retribution. Emily and I discussed this. What we want is a chance to make this moment matter. Richard nodded slowly. I'm listening. Stephen continued. Emily runs a nonprofit called the Carter Foundation. It funds sports programs, therapy, and learning support for children with physical and developmental challenges. Emily added, "Next month, we're hosting a charity gala to raise money for a new adaptive sports center. We're short on volunteers for setup and guest assistance. We'd welcome an extra pair of hands." She looked directly at Brian. "Would you be willing to help?" The sales manager blinked. "You want me to volunteer?" Stephen's gaze was steady. "Not to punish you, to teach you. Sometimes the only way to understand dignity is to serve those who live it every day, without power, status, or luxury." Brian hesitated. Around the room, no one spoke. A few salespeople shifted uncomfortably. Daniel, standing nearby, seemed unsure whether to smile or not. Then Brian finally nodded. "Yes, I'll do it." "Good," Emily said softly. "It won't be easy, but it will be real." Richard, visibly impressed, turned to Stephen. "Mr. Carter, we'd also like to offer a dealership-wide training on unconscious bias. If you can connect us with someone from your foundation's network, we'll implement it immediately." Emily smiled. "That's a start." As they walked back toward the Azure, Emily paused and looked around. The dealership that had dismissed her just yesterday now stood still in a moment of reckoning, not because she'd shouted or sued or demanded vengeance, but because she had refused to let her dignity be defined by other people's standards. Outside, the chauffeur opened the Rolls-Royce door. Emily looked at Stephen. "You sure we weren't too soft on him?" Stephen chuckled. "You weren't soft, you were unforgettable." As they pulled away, the sun glinted off the showroom's windows. Inside, Brian remained rooted to the floor, staring at the car that had exposed his worst instincts, and the couple who had shown him a better way forward. The lesson had been delivered, but whether it would take root, that was up to him. Part 5. The Measure of a Person. 1 month later, the ballroom of the historic Boston Grand Hotel shimmered under the glow of crystal chandeliers. Tables lined with white linen and centerpieces of blue orchids filled the room. A jazz quartet played softly as guests arrived: donors, advocates, medical professionals, and families of children with disabilities. It was the Carter Foundation's biggest event of the year, a benefit gala to raise funds for a new adaptive sports center, the first of its kind in the state. And this year, it held more significance than ever. Near the main entrance, Brian Matthews stood in a Navy staff vest, not his usual tailored blazer. His name tag read simply, "Volunteer." He wasn't greeting celebrities or closing sales. Instead, he was helping guests find their tables, assisting children in wheelchairs, and occasionally wiping down a juice spill from the floor. A month ago, this setting would have felt beneath him. Tonight, it felt like redemption. "Mr. Blake," a soft voice called. He turned to see a boy about 10 years old, seated in a sleek red wheelchair. His name was Thomas, and over the past 2 weeks, he had become Brian's unexpected mentor in humility. "I saved you a spot at my table." Thomas grinned. "You promised we'd finish that game after dinner." Brian smiled and crouched to meet him eye level. "And I always keep my promises now, don't I?" From across the ballroom, Emily Carter, elegant in a simple sapphire blue gown, watched the interaction. Standing beside her, Stephen gently touched her elbow. "Still think we were too soft on him?" he whispered with a smile. She shook her head slowly. "No, this was the right path." Brian spotted her and made his way over, wiping his hands on a napkin tucked into his waistband. "Mrs. Carter," he said, stopping respectfully, "I just wanted to thank you, again, for giving me the opportunity to do this." Emily met his eyes. "You followed through. That means something." "I'll be honest," he continued, his voice lower now. "At first it felt like a punishment, like I was being humbled for show. But then I saw what these families go through, what these kids overcome, and I realized, I've been measuring people by the wrong yardstick my whole life." He paused, then added, "Thomas taught me how to play adaptive basketball. He says I've got the worst shot he's ever seen." Emily chuckled. "He's brutally honest, but fair." Brian nodded. "And that's exactly what I needed." Just then, Daniel, the young salesman who had handled Emily's car purchase, approached with a clipboard. "Brian," he said, "Mr. Carter asked if you'd be willing to manage the paperwork for their fleet order. He said you've earned a second chance." Brian blinked. What?" Emily smiled. "Trust has to be rebuilt. But he believes in giving people room to grow. So do I." Emotion welled up behind Brian's eyes. But he blinked it back. Thank you, truly. Later that evening, after the speeches and performances, the guests rose for a standing ovation as the Carter Foundation announced it had exceeded its fundraising goal. The new adaptive center would begin construction within the year. As the applause faded and the jazz band resumed, Brian found himself back at Thomas's table, laughing through a terrible basketball move in the hallway. Across the room, Emily and Stephen stood hand in hand, not soaking in praise or attention, but quietly connecting with guests. They moved through the room with ease, not flaunting wealth, but radiating purpose. Brian watched them with new eyes. A month ago, he had dismissed Emily as a time waster in sneakers. Now, he knew better. He understood that dignity doesn't announce itself with designer labels. And wealth is not the measure of worth. What mattered was how a person treated others when no one important was watching. And now, even when no one was watching, Brian Matthews acted differently. He had learned that respect isn't reserved for clients in suits, it's owed to every human being. And sometimes, all it takes is being wrong, deeply, embarrassingly wrong, to finally understand what's right. In a world that often judges by what meets the eye, clothes, posture, or status, it's easy to forget one simple truth: every person deserves respect. Emily Carter's story reminds us that kindness, dignity, and fairness never go out of style. She didn't respond to humiliation with anger or revenge. Instead, she taught a lesson, one rooted in empathy, not ego. And isn't that what many of us have learned over a lifetime? That character matters more than credentials. That the way we treat a stranger says more about us than any title ever will. Whether you're retired, working, or mentoring the next generation, this story speaks to something universal: how we see others, and how we choose to act when no one's looking. So next time you see someone who doesn't look the part, remember, you never know their story. They might just be someone who changes yours. If this story moved you, or reminded you of a moment from your own life, a time when you were misjudged, or a time you learned a powerful lesson, please share it in the comments below. Your voice might be the one that helps someone else reflect or grow. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, stories that make us feel, reflect, and reconnect with the values that truly matter, please hit that subscribe button. Give the video a thumbs up, and consider sharing it with a friend. Because sometimes, all it takes is one quiet moment to change someone's outlook, and one story to change a heart. We'll see you in the next one.